Happy Friday, guys, and welcome to another episode of Let's Talk Dubs. I'm your host, Bill T. Another Friday, another podcast, and lots to talk about this week. A pretty interesting podcast that we have coming up, and I'll get into those details in just a minute. This last week, I just came back from Buses by the Bridge. Did a little one-day trip turnaround. I did a little video on it on my YouTube channel, so you ought to go check that out and take a look at what took place. A little 300-mile round tripper in the double cab, so shot down there and back in a day. Left my house about 8 o'clock and got home around 5 and hauled the mail in the old trusty double cab. So that video is coming out. It's already out, so you guys can go check that out. Coming up toward the end of the month, I'm going to be headed to Octo and also the Grand National Roadshow Show. I'll check that out on Friday and then go to Octo Saturday. So if you're out and about, you're going to be down there, hit me up, let me know, and maybe we'll cross paths. So this week's podcast is a good one. Before we had a VW kid on the podcast, we also had William Noguera, who's on death row currently. Actually, he's no longer on death row, and some stuff has changed in particular to his case. But he was in San Quentin for over 30 years, and now he's at Cochrane facility. So we get on the podcast, and Bill was reaching out to me, and we kind of talked with VW Kid a little bit, and I wanted to kind of get into what the early VW scene was like near Puente California. So wanted to check that out and to kind of do a deep dive into what it was like on the early days of the VW scene, where they were at late 70s, early 80s, and we get into that pretty well. We talk a lot about the culture, the times, the music, and a lot of what Bugs Buddies was all about back in the day. So he goes in depth. It's a little raw. There's definitely some insights to what that scene was all about back in the day. So I'm sure you guys will enjoy it. Definitely an interesting story. So, but don't forget, if you like the podcast, leave a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts and get a shout out. Also pick up some merch, and you get a shout out this week. I got a shout out for David Genscher. David Genscher out of Jacksonville, Florida, picked up some merch in a sticker pack. Appreciate him for supporting the podcast. So shout out to my guy, David. And if you want to support the podcast, you get a shout out as well. So support the podcast. Go to letstalkdubs.com, click on the store tab, and pick up some merch. I'm going to be having some new shirt designs coming out soon. And don't forget, you want to support our sponsors that sponsor Let's Talk Dubs. So VW Trends Magazine, go subscribe today at vwtrendsmagazine.com. And also Ross Wolf. Go check out their website. Lots of cool aftermarket parts manufactured by enthusiasts for enthusiasts. Go to rosswolf.com. That's ROSSWULF.com. I also wanted to mention Lufthansa's Burn Your Oil 2024 competition pack. So for $5, you get a Klingon oil change and a sticker pack from those guys. And what they'll do is you go use the QR code, you upload your mileage, and whoever puts the most miles in their VW gets free oil change kits for a year. And details are on their website. So check out the link down below, Lufthansa, Lufthaus. Go check them out today at thelufthaus.com. The time has come for us to get into the details of this podcast. So we're going to discuss early LA VW style, LA style VWs, roundtable with Robert VW Kid and William Noguera from prison on this week's Let's Talk Dubs.
You probably don't know that there's a new Volkswagen out that doesn't look like a Volkswagen. It's got everything that people who like the bug like.
Okay, everybody. So on today's show, we've done we did a couple podcasts in the past with William Noguera and also VW Kid, and we discussed some of the early Cal style VW scene. But what I wanted to do is take an opportunity, what we're doing today, and we're doing a roundtable today, and on the podcast today, I've got VW Kid on the podcast, and I've also got William Noguera. So what we're going to do today is we're going to kind of take a deep dive into what the early LA VW scene was, specifically near La Puente, and what was happening in those days, late 70s, early 80s. So, guys, welcome to the show.
Thank you.
So, kid, where are you calling from? Where are you at right now?
Oh, I'm in Glendale right now.
All right, and William, where are you at?
Well, I'm at the Corcoran Resort right now. So for those who don't know, I'm actually at Corcoran State Prison. They're now telling me that I am no longer a prisoner, that I'm a resident, and that this is a resort. So I'm going to go ahead and flow with that.
Well, I like that.
Know, that's true.
Yeah, always stay focused on the positive, right? So now,
absolutely.
When we talked earlier, we talked a little bit about Bugs Buddies, and we got in a little bit of detail with two of you separately on the podcast. And I thought it would be really great to bring the two of you together, and maybe we talk about, the early days of the VW scene over there in La Puente, and kind of how things came together. So I think maybe what we'll start off with is, kid, let's talk about
This call and your telephone number will be monitored and recorded.
Let's talk about
great.
Let's talk about your entrance into the VW scene and kind of where you and Bill's paths crossed, and how all that comes together.
All right, so I would say about 1979. I had an older cousin. He was a lowrider. He lived next door to me, and his sister Eileen, she was going out with a guy named Ronnie, and he was in a cowlick club from San Gabriel called the Proud Californians. This is the same club that Ray Mejia was in, Conrad was in, and they all had cowlick cars. This is even before Ray had a logo on his maroon oval window. And so I saw Ronnie had a clean 65, like smoke gray cowlick car, one-piece windows, tinted, the typical cowlick car. Center lines on it. He had a 1776 with Webers. And I didn't know much about Volkswagens. The only experience I had with the Volkswagen before that was Steve Tim's shop. I would see that his race Gia, the Mean Machine, on Florence, the next city over in Val. And I knew it was some type of race car because of all the stickers.
Right.
And I didn't know it was a Gia until like later on. So, I wanted to build like a muscle car, you know what I mean? Because I thought that those were the fast cars, right? This is like in 79. And, I was like in 8th, 9th grade. And so what happened was Rodney took me for a ride in his bug. That thing was fast, And I was like, wow, this is cool. This is nice, And so that was like the first time I even drove in a bug with Ronnie. So that piqued my interest about the Volkswagens. Now, I grew up around lowriders my whole life. Huntington Park was a hotbed for lowriding, just like La Puente. We had Brown Breed, we had the Dukes, we had the Old Memories, we had all the lowrider clubs that originated, or guys would fly their plaques. So, but for me at that time, lowriding had a stigma. It was associated with criminal activity and and gangbangers and all that stuff, right?
Yeah.
As a kid, I would see these lowriders on the curb with their trunk open, and the cops would have them out there, sitting on the curb, So like I'm like I don't want that life, man. Even though I love the cars, my cousin was doing it. He had an Impala lowrider, and so I go, well, I guess the Volkswagens it is, And then so I was going to school in Bellflower, which is a little ways from Huntington Park.
Mm-hmm.
So my mom was like, man, I don't want to be driving anymore. We're going to find you a car. Back then we got our license at 15 and a half, and so I go, okay, I'm gonna get a Volkswagen. So we went looking around, and then I went to Burbank where I saw an ad in the Recycler. The Recycler was a newspaper back in the day. It came out on Thursdays, I believe. And I saw an ad for a 66 bug. It was in my price range. My budget was $1,500, and it was for 13. So my older sister's boyfriend, we went to go look at it. He was a muscle car guy. So we went to go look at it. And I loved it because of the white with the red interior. I didn't know what a Pagali was. I didn't know it was a special edition 1 year only car with the sunroof. But why I fell in love with it is because my cousin's, who was a lowrider, his girlfriend at the time, her older sister was going out with the president of the car club called Brown Breed. And he had a beautiful 62 convertible, white with the red interior. All original slams, you know. And so I fell in love with that color combination. So I go, man, that's the car. I want that bug with the white and the red interior. So, you know, I bring it home. And prior to that, I was hanging out with Rene Relas. He was the youngest brother of the Dukes family. And he was a little old. He was like 3 years older than me. Because he used to hang out next door at my cousin's house, you know, with all the lowriders and my cousins and stuff. So he would take me out to like all the hot spots, the cruising spots and everything. And, you know, I was like 14, 15. So he used to take me to this place called the Center in La Puente. And that's when the first time I saw like the Bugs Buddies, like their cars, you know. And then there was another place called Geno's in Hollywood. And everybody used to hang out at the gas station on the corner. And that's when the first time I saw Bill's car. All slammed, original, white with a rag top. Bunch of chicks hanging out, bumping the disco music and all that. So I said right away, I go, man, I want to slam my car, you know. So I figured it out, you know. With my buddy David, we pulled the bars and did the clicks and all that. It's all original. And then I was cruising around, and there's another spot, high school called Salesian, and they used to have dances. And after those dances, we used to hang out at this place called The Hole. It's on the bottom of the Salesian High School. Yeah. And that's when I first met Bill. He came up to me, man, and he was telling me, Cambio. I didn't know what that meant. You know, he saw my white bug, right? And he goes, yeah. And I go, change. What do you mean? And he goes, it's a number job. It's a pan job. And that's how we first met, you know? And then after that, you know, we just hung out and you know, with Renee, we would take him to all the places. And I would see the Bugs Buddies everywhere. And they were like the guys, man. They were like BW royalty in the neighborhood. But they also had a bad reputation, you know? You either loved them or you hated them. You know what I mean? Yeah. And Bill will tell you why. You know what I mean? Now, so, but I was fascinated with them. I'm like, dude, these are the guys. They got all the chicks. You know, look at Bill, man, good-looking guy with all the girls, and, you know, he could throw down. He was tough. And, you know, and I'm a younger kid following these guys around, Renee and them, you know. Now, so that's – go ahead.
No. Well, so, Bill, what made you, like, when you saw his car and you came over and you said Cambio, like, what made you ask him if his car was like that?
See, this is that whole thing that I keep talking about when it comes to – you know, the Volkswagen scene in Los Angeles area. When I said Cambio in Spanish means change. And we used to call them changeovers. Mm-hmm. And what I learned very early on was that usually Hispanic guys that were in that club scene or in the disco scene or the LA scene that had these fully original cars that were dumped to the ground with alloys or the moon hubcaps, just really detailed out. I mean, these cars look like they came off the showroom in like 1962 or whatever. And the only thing that was different about them is if they were slammed on 135s and 165s, or like me, I had 145s in the back. Right. I was slammed. I mean, I was on the ground. When I would change lanes in the freeway, I would break off the reflectors off the freaking freeway lanes. That's how slammed my car was. Right. But the thing was that there was a reason why I said changeover or Cambio to this guy who was a Mexican kid, and he kind of resembled the kind of guys that I hung around with. It was because, and this is the truth, this is where the retro look that everybody now talks about, and you look at every guy in these car clubs now, and they have all original cars or slammed on alloys. This look came from La Puente, California, specifically the Bugs Buddies. How that happened is because, and it leads to why I said Cambio about his car, is because, look, we didn't have any money. We were just kids that loved California bugs. But in those days, and I'm talking about 1977, 1978, right, the California look was basically a Volkswagen that was de-chromed. They took the bumpers off the thing. They They lowered the front, they put center lines on it, put a big motor, a stinger on it, and that was a cowlick bug. And although, okay, it was kind of cool, actually specifically Eddie Boy Chacon and Adam Chacon, who are the president and vice president of the Bugs Buddies, they had a particular look in mind. And it was really, they had the love for the lowriders, the Imperials group together, all these lowrider clubs. But the truth of the matter is, and this is the bare bones of where that look came from. We were in the car club, the Bugs Buddies. There was prerequisites to be in that car club. Mm-hmm. Number one, you had to be from Puente California. Number two, you had to be Hispanic. And number three, and most importantly, your car had to be a Cambio. And what that means, it means a changeover. Eddie Boy and Adam realized, because of the Doom Buddies thing, that you could basically take the body off a Volkswagen, buy a pan, and then put another Volkswagen body up with no problems. You get a rivet gun, and you're good. And that's where this look came from. The Bugs Buddies, and I can speak on authority of this because I was the 7th member made. Mm-hmm. In 1978, I was made. And Robert will talk about this, the kind of reputation I had, but these cars in the car club were all stolen. Every car in the Bugs Buddies, and we numbered 18 of us, were all stolen. The car had to be 67 or older. It had to be a sunroof, ragtop, or convertible.
You have 60 seconds remaining.
And it had to be immaculate. Now, when I come back, I'll tell you where the retro look came from and why. And anybody that says this isn't true, they can come on the show and, rebuff what I say, because, like I said, I was in this scene in the mid to late 70s, and this is exactly where this look came from. And all these other car clubs that are claiming to be Bugs Buddies, I'm still alive, and I can tell you who was in the car club and who wasn't, and I'm going to shock you with some of the guys who have gone on different magazines talking about they were one of us, and they weren't. I'll call back.
You have a prepaid call. You will not be charged for this call. To accept this call, say or dial 5 now. Thank you for using Global Tel Link.
All right. William, so we got you back on. All right. So now you were saying at this time, so kind of the prerequisites to be in this car club is you had to be from La Puente, and then you obviously had to be Mexican or Hispanic, right, of some degree, and then you had to be down to be in the club. Like so you're saying all the cars in the club were changeovers.
Every one of them was stolen, and I know because the majority of them I helped steal them.
Yeah.
So I know Adam Chacon, Eddie Boy, Larry, Bobby, Charlie, me, all of them, and I can tell you why I actually. See, I grew up with these kids. We were hanging together at 8, 9-year-old kids. Eddie Boy was a little bit older than us, but he had a vision. Yes, it's based on the disco, lowrider, original cars slammed to the ground. You never see lowriders that they shave the door handles or the chrome. They were all original. But the real reason, and it fits what we liked, is that we were broke. We didn't have any money. So we would go out and buy a wrecked Volkswagen from a dismantler shop, and by the way, I had a dismantler's license too at one point, so I was a junk man. So I got all the wrecked Volkswagens.
Yeah.
So I would buy a pan or a wrecked bug, $150, $125. That's what it cost me. I yanked the body off. I take for sure the VIN number that was in front of under the hood. I take it. I would throw away the body, and let's say I had a 57 oval window. Well, I would go out and I would look around and look for a mint condition 57, and I would steal it. Look, I know people are appalled by this, but this is what you want the truth. This is what really happened. And again, I don't like to, I'm not a bullshit artist. I like to lay people the truth, and whether they can take it for what it is, but Robert will attest to this. So we would change the car over. We'd put the mint condition show car on the pan. We'd bolt it down. And of course, that was it. We didn't have any more money. I mean, we were barely scraping by those days. So what would we do? We'd slam it to the ground. Obviously we didn't have money for paint jobs and all that stuff. So the car was already in mint condition. It had all the chrome. So there it is, a slammed car. A little bit later, in 1979, we began looking for alloys. Most Volkswagens didn't have them. They had center lines, they had Rivieras, they had Chromies, they had spider rims with the MPs or 5-spokes, but nobody had alloys. And, well, we started stealing Porsches. We'd take the alloys off, put the adapters on. So that's where the look came from, of slammed original cars with alloys. And then, of course, later we started taking cars with big engines. As we evolved as a car club, and me at the forefront, we started stealing, cars with big motors. And most of the guys in the car club didn't understand 1641, 1756, or anything, or 2180. I was the one, because I worked at Mikey's Precision VW. I was one of their mechanics.
Right.
And I began to learn everything about the cars. That's how I became the sergeant of arms, or sergeant at arms, of the Buzz Buddies, the guy with the fastest car.
So you had kind of the mechanical ability. You worked in the field. You worked in the world of Volkswagens at the time. And then kid runs into you at a nightclub over there, like a teen nightclub where they have all the hangouts and stuff, and you've got this super slick laid out bug. And now, kid, you come from a thing of like, you're trying to stay out of trouble, but then again, you're seeing these guys, and these are the cool guys, right? These are the cool guys back in the day.
Oh yeah.
So your impression.
And then what happened was, my buddy Renee saw, I think it was Adam's Red Gia. It was on Smoothies, all original. This is like 79, I think. And Renee bought it from Adam. Is that right, Bill? Did Renee buy it from Adam, or who had the Red Gia?
Yeah. Yeah, he bought the. Yeah.
So he bought the Red Gia, and then that's when we were all hanging out at all the cool spots, and that's where the Buzz Buddies were, man. Especially the center, and Elysian Park or Whittier, all the typical spots, and I was just enamored with them, man. And that's, at that time I had met Bill, and he, started more, I guess, towards, when the why he's in prison for that happened, he started hanging out really a lot in my neighborhood, after that happened. And that's when, we became close, and we did a car together. He wanted a convertible. So, we got a black with a white convertible. That's the one that's in Lowrider magazine.
Mm-hmm.
And that was a Cambio, and we did that in Southgate. And that's how it was. Bill was the guy,
And now, Bill, tell me about, like, what would be a typical night going to the center, something like that. Like, what was a typical? Take me back to the place of, like, what was a typical day for you back then? Like, it's a Saturday night, you guys getting ready to go out, do whatever, or Wednesday night going to meet at the teen club. Like, how did all that? What was that like?
Yeah, it was really special, because the first time that, I was considered one of the guys, I was about to get my first car, and I got a 63.
This call and your telephone number will be monitored and recorded.
It was red with fully polished alloys. It had a 1756 stroker with 44s. Just before I got it, I actually, they would come to my house. And in this particular day, it was the night of the center. Everybody's going to go there, and they're going to go to nightclubs at night, and they pull up to my house, and all of them. I mean, just imagine this. You're a kid. You're 15 years old, and at that time, like 15 slammed on alloys with convertibles and rag tops pull up to your house, and they're all playing the same tape, the same disco song, and you can hear these guys for a quarter of a mile. Their stereos they have amps in them, they're Concords or Pioneers, and you come out of your house and everybody's there waiting for you, and you get in and everybody caravans together on the freeway. It's, all these bugs and you see it now, but back then it was unheard of. Man, you felt like royalty. As soon as I started, I already knew these guys, but when I started becoming like really close to them, it was like, I can't tell you the feeling. It was a gang best friends, a car club. It was just something, all that stuff put together, and it was supercharged with this look that the Bugs Buddies had. I'm not going to lie to you, all these guys their cars were immaculate. They all had a particular look. They were good-looking guys. All the girls liked them. Some guys liked them and wanted to be like them, or other guys hated them. Other car clubs hated us.
Right.
So it was euphoric, man.
What were the other car clubs around at the time?
Oh man, like
Robert
was saying, yeah, the Brown Breed. There was Lightning Volks. There was, there was a DKV. There was just so many different car clubs, and I was with DKV at one time before this. I had a different type of Volkswagen that just sucked. And I was trying to really make it happen, but I couldn't. I didn't have the real know-how of how to change over a car. And before this, I was a muscle car guy. I had a 1971 Super Sport Nova that pulled 1160s in a quarter mile. And let me tell you, the reason I got rid of it, I lost to a Volkswagen. A freaking Volkswagen with a turbocharge ate me up.
Yeah. Do you know who that was?
I never... It was a little white kid with long blonde hair. He had a whale tail on it. It was, it was an Orange County guy. It was definitely an Orange County guy.
They're the ones that had money, right, to have a turbo, right, at that time.
Yeah, he had a snail, and I didn't know what the hell it was. It didn't sound, when he revved it, it didn't have the kind of response that a high-performance engine had. Right. It was a 1641. But this dude walked away from an 1160 Nova in the quarter mile. I could not believe it. And the next day I went and sold my Nova.
And got you a Volkswagen, huh?
Oh, I got me one, and that didn't work out. So I ended up doing the Cambio thing because I became a member of the Bugs Buddies, and that is how the whole retro look started. Look, I've heard and I've read. Look, I'm in this tower, and I was at San Quentin Death Row. I would hear all these stories. I'd read Hot VW magazine, and look, Robert is well established in the VW scene right now. His split window was just the centerfold of Hot VW magazine. Mm-hmm. He has a very respectable presence in that world. So I would read, he'd send me the magazine, and I would start getting angry. I hear all these stories of guys of these new car clubs now, specifically the German folks or whatever. Look, all respect to those guys. They got beautiful cars. They've taken things to a different level, and I appreciate that. What I don't appreciate is guys like that want to somehow start saying that they were the ones that invented the retro cow look, and how they do it by associating themselves by saying that they're original members of the Bugs Buddies. Let me tell you this right now on this show so everybody hears it, and I know you have a huge following. There's not a member in the German Volks or German folks or any of those dudes that were a Bugs Buddy. How I know this is because between 1977 and 1983, December 20th, when I was arrested, I was the sergeant of arms of the Bugs Buddies. I am an original member. I'm not some guy that came in later. I am an original member. And I was the sergeant of arms. I knew everybody in the car club. Everybody knew me. And if you went to L.A. in that time and you asked who I was, they'd tell you exactly who I was. So if anybody else was in the car club or associated with the car club, I would have known it. Now, I do know who Ruben is, and Robert and I were laughing about this. He used to drive a white 65 fake sunroof, and it was kind of a copy of a VW Kid's car. And one time he came and parked across the street from Precision VW. Now, Precision VW was owned by Mike Trelch. He won J brackets at Bug-In at the time with a bug called Cashmere. It was a 2180 65 beige car with alloys. It was fast. So we were sitting there, and sure enough, we see Ruben pull up in the 65, and he's revving this 1641 with Padrones or Solexes, whatever you want to call it, and he's pulled up against another white VW that's about a 71. And these dudes jump on it, and Ruben blows his freaking transmission. So you can imagine the laugh that we got when that happened. Yeah. So I do know who the guy was. He's not a Bugs Buddy now. He never was one.
So, and now, do you think the reason why people maybe want to have an association with that is because of the reputation Bugs Buddies had, or what?
I think. Man,
Well, I think like Robert. I'm sorry. Go ahead,
I'll
Robert.
tell you, this is my feeling is, us 80s guys, a lot of us, after the 80s, we got out of the scene, raising a family, career, and things like that. But then as we got older, we went back to our first automotive love, was the Volkswagen. So a lot of us 80s guys came back in. But meanwhile, a lot of clubs were still doing the Volkswagen thing. And the German folks, Pip and all his guys and all that, they were doing all that. And when I came back in the scene, when they were saying that, a certain club originated the style, I'm like, wait a minute, the math doesn't compute, because those guys are all like 90s kids. We were doing this way before that, And then I dropped my pictures on the Samba thread, and that's when it like hit the fan. Everybody's like, what? But yeah, dude, these are my cars. These are all like 81, 82, 83, 84, 85, And I told them it was a lowrider influence from the get-go,
Mm-hmm.
And I even mentioned the Bugs Buddies back then, but just subtly, because still the Bugs Buddies for me back then, like they were hated, for obvious reasons, right? And so I'm like, I got to be careful when I throw that out there now, you know what I mean? And so, come to find out, I see conflict and people saying that they originated the style, and other clubs said no, and then but once I came back in the scene, and my friends from the 80s and all that, and we had actual proof,
You
pictures,
have 60 seconds remaining.
and I was like, pictures, or it didn't happen, because these are my pictures, and they actually even dated,
Right.
And that's when it went, it blew up and all that, and I guess a certain club was telling their members that they were the originators and all that, and obviously it came out, the truth always comes out, and that's what happened.
Yeah. Well, I think, and we'll get in a few seconds. We'll get William back on the phone here as soon as we get this. But
Yeah, let me call back.
Yeah. So there's a whole, I think the thing for me is like every style begets another style, right? So you see a little bit of cow look, you put your own twist on it. You see some lowrider stuff, you put your own twist on it.
Yeah.
And that kind of feeds and builds into the styles. But especially when you're talking about, that particular style that's fairly prominent in the LA, East LA area, like that's really, it stands out quite a bit.
Man. Everybody wanted alloys, man. And the thing too, going back to the GFK, I like Bill said, I give him much respect even to this day.
This is Global Tellink. You have a prepaid call from
William Noguera.
an inmate at the California State Prison.
So,
Yeah.
so I'm, ultimately the purpose of this whole podcast is to kind of just, validate, like maybe get a little more in depth of like the scene back then, who's doing what, and then what eventually kind of comes from all that stuff, right? Like we know, Bill, you ended up going a different path. Robert, you were in the scene for quite a while until like what, early 90s or late 80s, and you got out.
90, I want to say 91.
And so with Bugs Buddies, obviously when things start, when the crew starts kind of having some rough times, losing members, stuff like that, what eventually happened with Bugs Buddies and that whole group that was out doing all the stuff they were doing back then?
Well, there was the whole Bugs Buddies, most of the guys they stole cars, and all the cars were stolen, but they also were getting older, and some of the guys would just steal one or two cars to make their car, and that was it. Well, me and Adam Chacon, we took things to a different level, and Robert, look, it's for him to say how much is involved, but I always like being straight, and Robert got involved. So at a point in like 1981, I began to deliver cars into Mexico, and they were high-end cars, Porsches, Mercedes, all high-end cars. Mm-hmm. And we really took that to a different level so we can support the Volkswagen, basically habit, call it a drug, because, you start building engines with 48s, you start spending a lot of money, and you risk yourself trying to steal all the cars. So, it began to evolve, and some of the guys stayed in the club, but they were getting older. And, I made some mistakes. I look at it now, and I'm not bragging about it. It's what happened, so I try and state the truth there, so they know what happened, so we get to the bottom of this whole, where the style came from. But I did some things I shouldn't have done. I took things to a different level. I got really hot, meaning police were looking at me, and I didn't have any filters. And a lot of the guys, after I left, December 20th, 1983, I was arrested. I was sent to prison. I spent 40 years nearly on death row, and now I'm at the Corcoran Resort, if that's what they want to call it now. But the truth is that I made a lot of mistakes, and once I left the scene, although some guys continued on, most of the car club began to fall apart. I think that's my fault. I took us to a different level, and with that level, I think because of my bad reputation, and Robert will tell you, I didn't have a bad reputation just because I was bragging about it. I had a bad reputation because, well, that's who I was. And the car club fell apart. A lot of the guys went to different things. They got married. They had families. And they walked away from something that was very true to them. A lot of them have stayed away from it. I don't think any of the original members of the Bugs Buddies are back in the scene. Robert has continued on. He's kind of a second generation guy. He and I brought him in, and things continued. And as I said, he has a very good reputation. But the car club kind of fell apart. I think by 86, 87.
Yeah,
most of the guys were not
86. Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow.
Now, and really, there's always an evolution, right, with a group of guys. And when the guys are young and they're in there, and you come from, the part of town where you're not getting a lot of parental supervision, you know what I'm saying? And on that, you're on the streets, you're doing whatever you're doing, and it kind of, bad, just like good pushes good, bad pushes bad, you know what I mean? And so you're saying that when you took the club and you started getting into a lot of heat, it made a lot of people, like it turned it up quite a bit, where maybe some people, weren't really comfortable, or they got married, had some kids, trying to get, maybe changing their life and some things like that, and which is the typical evolution of most car clubs and things like that. And
yeah,
especially when you guys start getting a reputation, it's not small, right? It's not a big city back then. It's a small town. People start finding out, well, these guys are in trouble. So next thing you know, you guys are always being looked at when something's going on in that area,
Well, there was a task force, the sheriffs, trying to break it up or find out about the club at that time too.
And now,
the heat.
William, you told me one time you had your car got impounded. They picked up your car and took it to the.
That's a crazy story.
So what's the story behind that?
Robert is also involved in that story. So look, this is towards the end. This is like towards the end of my career, if you want to call it that. But yeah, I had a black with a white top, immaculate convertible Bug. It was slammed with alloys, had mud flaps on it. It was just a beautiful car. It was in mint condition. And as Robert mentioned, there was a task force from the Highway Patrol and the sheriffs led by a guy by the name of Lieutenant Scharf. And Lieutenant Scharf became very aware of the Bugs Buddies, the car club, and the reputation that we had, but more so that once we had established ourselves in the late 70s, a lot of Hispanic kids in Los Angeles in the 80s began to do these changeovers from cars in Orange County and other places. They'd take them, they'd strip them, or they'd do changeover. So he was on this task force, and I was coming home one day from La Habra, and a sheriff pulled up behind me, flashed his lights, and pulled me over. And I just stepped out. He said, "Hold on a minute, sit down on the curb." I was in La Habra Heights, and I see a plainclothes officer pull up, and I look, and I know who it is. It's Lieutenant Scharf, and he walks up to me and he says, "Wow, Bill, this has to be your best one so far." He says, "Pop your deck lid." He pops the deck lid. He sees this monster motor, all black chrome and brass and, Recaro seats. It's just, this thing is immaculate. He just says, "Well," and right when he says, "well," here comes a flatbed. and he's impounding it. And I said, look, you got 5 days to prove it's stolen, or they have to give it back to you. And they put a stamp on it, a higher patrol stamp, that it's passed inspection. So he took it, and on the 4th day, I call him and I say, hey, how you doing? I said, yeah, Mr. Noguera, we were just talking about you. The DNI are about to file charges on you. And I said, what? He's going to help you wax my car? And he says, no. We know where the car is from, and he said the area that it was taken from, and Robert can attest to that it was correct. And well, my stomach clenched. I mean, it really did, because we mentioned the person's name, whose car it was, as well as the city it was taken from. He was absolutely right, which told me somebody close to me had talked to the cops. Mm-hmm. So. But he says, and tomorrow morning when we get the warrant for your arrest, when she comes to identify the car, we'll arrest you. So I sat back and I started thinking, there's no way she can identify the car. It looks totally different. But if someone pulled me into the cop shop and said, hey, this is your car, someone stole it, and it looks like the car I had, they'd say, shit, yeah, that's exactly right, that's the car. So, but, he and I had this game going back and forth. He would try and catch me, and I would try to evade him. Well, the information that he gave me that really saved my ass was that he said she'll be here tomorrow morning to identify the car. So I knew that she hadn't yet, and I knew that car then had to disappear. So I called Robert, of all people. I called Robert. I spoke to him and his buddy, and we went to go look at the police impound. And it was a 15-foot wall around it. Had cameras. It was not going to be an easy job. And, Robert left and his buddy left, and we conveyed at the house. We kind of talked about it, and they went home, and I did what I normally do. I took over. I went there that night at 1:05, jumped the wall, stepped in, hit my electric fuel pump, thing came on, hit my halogen headlights, and started my engine. And I pulled the car into the thing. I cut the gate, opened it, did a few other things that I won't mention. So the cameras were not on. The dogs were suddenly asleep, and I pulled that car out of there, and I drove it off. Went to a buddy's house, and I told him, cut it into 1,000 pieces. And before too long, I jumped the fence of my wall of my home, stepped in the house, and 3 minutes later, there's a helicopter around my house. Lieutenant Sharp was there, and he was he was spitting froth from his mouth. He was so upset. He kept accusing me of stealing the car, and I told him, wait a minute, you had my car stolen? He says, dude, son of a bitch, it wasn't your car, it was this person. And I said, well, correct me if I'm wrong. The pink slip has my name, the registration has my name, the VIN numbers match the pink slip, and the person you said whose car belonged to never identified it. Am I correct? And he stopped.
Yeah.
He realized he had given me a way out. Yep.
Wow. That's nuts. And so, so needless to say, back in your younger days, you were kind of off the hinges. I mean, you were just continuing to go down a path. I mean, clearly, you're a different person 40 years later, but I think this is kind of a story of like what young kids can get into if they don't got positive influences in their life. You know what I mean? And if they're kind of surrounded by, a bunch of friends that just kind of, a bunch of teenage kids can't be up to too much good.
Yeah. That's the truth. Yeah, no, absolutely. And that's true. I always talk about, now I'm a different person. I've realized the error of my ways as a dumb kid. And I was a dumb kid. I was a teenager. Started about 14 or 15. My career ended at 19. And I had positive influences. And I said, I worked at Mikey's Precision VW. I was associated with Remco, Small Car Specialties, some of the bigger people in NHRL. I knew these guys.
Yeah.
But I chose this path because of the adrenaline rush I got from what I did. Now things are different. I lecture at universities about this, positivity, rehabilitation, the things I talk about. But the point of this whole podcast was not so much to brag about what I did as a kid, but to really get to the origins of the VW scene and that particular look, and whether people like it or not, that's the truth, and that's where it came from. And look, Bill, you're a big guy in the VW world. Robert as well. I'm kind of the outcast. I'm in prison calling you guys, and I have the stories because I was there. But look, I give all respect to the guys who are doing it right. The German folks are doing it correctly. They have beautiful cars. Those guys they're on top of it. The German, there's a couple other car clubs, a German style or a Volk style, and I've seen the cars. Robert has sent me videos as well as pictures, and look, my hat goes off to them. The only thing I would appreciate is that people tell the truth. Look, if you were influenced by a particular person or a car club, say it. Say the truth. There's no reason to need to talk about something that's not true. Right. And that's all I really would like to say about this.
Yeah, no, I think it's definitely an origin story of kind of the beginnings of where a hobby starts, because especially if there's not a lot of guys that are still there that are in the hobby from back then, and sometimes it seems like the only one talking about it is VW Kid online, because he was one of the few guys that's still in the scene that was around back then. You know what I mean? So it's good to get his story corroborated.
Yeah,
that's why I have the song like that, man.
Yeah, exactly. And he puts up the Bugs Bunny sign, man, and who answers but freaking Batman himself? You know, he pissed me off, and I will come out of retirement to talk about this stuff. But another thing that we're doing, Bill, that Robert and I are working on together, is a collective to actually put out a film. And, you know, I don't know if you have friends that are in the film business, but we would like to do a docu-film about the Bugs Buddies, about the VW scene, about the retro cowl look, just the entire thing. I'm actually writing a book about it.
You have 60 seconds remaining.
The book is called Prince of Thieves, and Robert and I are working on this together as a collaborative to try and put the story out there so people can really feel and understand what it was to be in that scene, the disco scene, the whole just the feeling of that particular time.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, man. It's like the American Graffiti for the 80s.
Yeah. Well, there's no question about that. I mean, there's definitely a lot of cultural influences today that were sparked off back then that have their origins back in that time.
And listen, Bill, we're not even touching on the mobile DJ scene, which is part of our teen scene back then.
Well, yeah, we'll come back and I'll call back right now. We'll talk about that.
70s, it was bands, right? Bands did the weddings, or bands or parties.
Yeah.
But like in 70, 79, the mobile DJ started coming into play in the alley area, you know, the house parties and all that. And they were all one of the same, you know?
Yeah, there's a lot of
Volkswagen scene, all the ones the same.
Yeah, a lot of musical influence and a lot of those other a lot of those other aspects were kicked off that were tied to not only the Latino culture, but also the car culture, and then the club scene and all that stuff. It was all part of that lifestyle back then. You know what I mean? So it's all tied together. Yeah, I think it's it's definitely great to be able to kind of get some clarification on a lot of this stuff, and ultimately it's just to, you know, get history straightened out to where it should be. You know.
Yeah. And like Bill said, man, I'm I'm adult family guy and very law abiding now. But, you know, I was a young kid growing up in South Central Huntington Park. Didn't have money. You know what I mean? Oh yeah. I was enamored with these older guys, so you know that's what happened.
Well, yeah. In my early youth, my history was altered by, you know, being one of the neighborhood kids and getting into quite a bit of trouble when I was younger, but luckily, you know, I was able to get out of that life before it got too serious for me, you know?
Yeah, me too. Man.
You know, honestly, that's, you know, the whole thing, you know, there's the whole process of just, it's really comes down to growing up, right? Cause I got a lot of friends that didn't grow up and their life didn't turn out where it should have.
William Noguera.
An inmate at the California State Prison, Corcoran, California.
Hey, Bill.
All right, buddy, you there?
Yes, sir.
So we got you on. So what we were talking about also is during that time in the late 70s, early 80s, you had, you know, it's the whole scene that kicks off from there, right? That has its origins in first the Hispanic culture, which bleeds into the car culture, which then bleeds into the music culture, and then style, music, all these things merging together, which we finally can look back at like the 80s, the early 80s, you know, LA style of things. What do you think some of the bigger impacts or some impacts we can see today that were influenced by things that kicked off back then, whether it's music culture, the DJ scene? We wanted to talk about that for a little bit. Like what was that all about?
Well, the music scene, music has always influences cultures, whether it be the lowrider scene, gang members, rap music today, reggaeton. But back then, as you mentioned, it was disco, and that has evolved. It would turn into house, techno, it turned into all these things. But with us and with that scene back in the late 70s, early 80s, there was a lot of mobile DJs. There was Pegasus. There was a DJ by the name of Victor Aleman. And Victor was basically Electra. He was like one of the biggest guys. He was the Electra DJ. And everybody in that scene knew who Electra was because they were so popular. He played the best music, and he was really, he's a good-looking guy. His production, he had a guy named Ruben that was behind him. He really pushed it. He had financial backing. So it's like one of the bigger DJs today. But the thing about Victor was he was a Bugs buddy. He was dating Adam and Eddie Boyz.
This call and your telephone number will be monitored and recorded.
He was dating Liz Chacon, which was Eddie Boy Adam's sister. Mm-hmm. So we kind of brought him in. He had a beautiful 64 convertible, white with a black top, and then he got a notchback. So that really got us into that scene, and the flyers back then had, special guests, Bugs Buddies, and they'd have a picture of our cars or whatever. And then he jumped to another group called Black Tie, and it really took off then. He was DJing at Fantasia and a bunch of the major hotels, the Quiet Canyons, and the VW scene just followed it. It was incredible to see the girls, the disco girls and the new wave girls merging together in forming this particular look that was based on that lifestyle. It really was incredible.
Oh yeah, it was the best of times, man. Best of times. And Victor had like the tower speaker. Back then, the Swim Vegas speakers were really big and heavy. He had the tower speakers, the lights, and it's crazy. Good times.
And now they had over there.
Yeah.
They had teen, like all ages dance parties and stuff like that, and club stuff.
Yeah, there was 18 and over.
Well, they were most. Yeah, 18 and over. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. And what was the name of the club?
There was some 21 and over, but I wasn't old enough yet to go.
What was the name of the club that everybody would meet up at?
Oh, Gino's in Hollywood was an 18 and over club.
Yeah, there was a couple. There was Gino's, Club 47, Quiet Canyons. Yeah. There was Elysian. There was a lot of different clubs. And then, of course, when I got arrested, there was like Wings, Peppers, a lot of these different clubs. But it was a little bit different. The music was changing. That disco era that I'm talking about that featured like Vivian V,
the fast
like
disco.
J.D. Hall. Yeah, Wonder Woman. There was from there it turned into freestyle, where you had like C-Bank, One More Shot, and that kind of music. But what I'm talking about is groups like Nightlife Unlimited, Lime. They had a song called My Magician. Mm-hmm. It was really incredible. I mean, maybe Robert can link and send you. And I'll have someone, Bill, send you some of the music, so maybe you can feature it.
Yeah.
But it was just incredible. It was
so the freestyle came in. The freestyle came in about 85, 86. Bill would have been already locked up, but that's when the mini trucks also came into the scene.
Right.
And the mini trucks were influenced by the Volkswagen guys. I mean, there was a club called Little Maniacs in my neighborhood in Huntington Park. I was at their first meeting when they were a bug club. And then they became a mini truck club, but they took their alloys with them and the rag tops, they put them in the snug tops, the canvas rag tops. That's all an influence from the Volkswagens.
Yeah, well, I mean, the influence is strong because you see a lot of the early mini trucks, they've got Porsche alloys on them. And that's coming.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, that's coming directly from the VW scene in it itself.
Yeah, back then, man, you had to lock up your Porsches.
Yeah, there's definitely I bought a bus from a guy here in Vegas, and the guy was in his 70s, and he said, yeah, back in the day, he was working in LA as a mechanic. He says, yeah, I borrowed a guy's Porsche that was wrecked, and I did him a favor because he made an insurance claim, but I took the motor and put it in my bus and all this stuff. So there was definitely a lot of people on the streets looking for some of those Porsches to borrow parts and engines and stuff from.
A lot of shenanigans.
Oh, yeah.
Especially with the Porsches. They're doing number jobs on Porsches, man. You know?
Yeah, there's
Yeah.
there's definitely a lot of that culture that you see kind of going. And what's funny is now a lot of these guys that have stayed on the straight and narrow and done their stuff and have a life now they're all having all those cars on the legit side, the Porsches and all that stuff. So it's definitely kind of come full circle. I mean, when I was a kid getting in trouble doing that kind of stuff, I always wanted to have 50 cars, and it'd be tough to have 50 cars if they all were legit. And now, I've got a little bit of a car collection, and I got nothing to worry about because they're all mine. And it's just, it's figuring out, I think you're still that kid.
Mine too, man. They're all mine.
I think you're still that kid that you want everything, and you finally wise up to the point where you figure out how to do it on the up and up, and really just put that same hard work, effort, and energy and channel it into something that, you can actually, obtain the things that you want without it. But I think it comes from the desire and the drive. And when you're young and you're short side, you don't see any other opportunity other than to just go get what you want. So,
yeah, and that's exactly right there. Immaturity is a Mickey Ficky, right? You want what you want, and you want that instant gratification, and you're supposed to go work. You're supposed to do things right and buy what you can, and if you can't, then you have to wait. I mean, but of course, bad influences, and look, some things influenced me where I became the bad influence. I mean, hell, I think I even influenced Robert in a bad way.
A little bit.
Well,
going back to going back to that, like I got early on. I got my mechanical knowledge from taking the Volkswagens apart, and that relayed into me like, okay, well, I'm gonna go work for Mercedes-Benz, and I did, and I had a 27-year career with them. I was in the top 35 techs in the nation, Master Guild, the highest level. I was ceremoniously knighted in Germany. So all that knowledge in the early years, it did pay off for me, and when I started to raise a family and a career and all that.
Well, and so, I think the sooner you catch on to that, right, the sooner you can channel your energy into doing something, especially if you love cars and, you want to be involved in something like that. I mean, look at you, you jumped in with the Mercedes, which is German, you know what I mean? German automotive, and you get right in there. So, I mean, it can work out.
This call and your telephone number will be monitored and recorded.
Well, it definitely can work out for you if you start focusing on doing the right thing, you know what I mean? And channeling your energy into positive things, man. So, I mean, ultimately what we wanted to do on this episode was kind of clarify some of the origins of that style, really what it was like back in those days, in the early days of the, La Puente VW scene, and kind of put some of those pieces together. So I think we did a pretty decent job of giving some insight into what that was like. And actually it was a fun scene. It was a fast scene, but it was a pretty rough scene, I would think.
Oh, for sure.
It was. Yeah, I think it was. And look, Robert hit on something very important, and you did too, Bill, that, when we were young, we did some really dumb things. I didn't have the opportunity because of my own mistakes and the actions and the consequences for those actions as you did and Robert. But I wisened up, in prison on death row where I had nothing going for me. And now things are definitely different. I lecture the kids. I talk about these situations and what influences. And actually, the prison here has just tapped my shoulder to organize a youth corps group to speak to kids that are on that path of making mistakes, and I'm lecturing to them. So there's positive things that come from this. My life obviously was destroyed because of my actions, but I picked up the pieces. I've done good things with them, and I would ask the audience if you don't mind, Bill, to check out my website, WilliamNoguera.com. Also, sign up for my newsletter. I do a show on podcast called Death Row Diaries, it's a true crime show. It's a little bit different than Volkswagen's, but it's me talking about true crime and about serial killers. And again, it's for me. I'm trying to educate the public to keep them safe. There's also a new show I'm coming up with. It's called Mind Stalker. It's on YouTube, and that's also about serial killers. And because I was with them for so many years, I mean, I'd lived next door to these guys for 40 years, and I spent all my time studying them and researching them. All the knowledge I had in stealing Volkswagen and studying marks, I began to study killers and to educate the public on how not to be victims.
Yeah, no, there's definitely a lot of good content out there. William, that the podcast you do is really interesting, especially the way you I've listened to several episodes as to how you break down the psychological experiences and the different dispositions that some of these guys have, that you're up there and you get and you're spending time with them by pure, the probability of you guys being in the same place. And so it's definitely a lot of interesting content on there. And we'll definitely put a link to your YouTube videos on there, and as well as a link to your podcast for this, and also your website. So if people want to reach out to you, they can.
Well, I appreciate it.
They can do that.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. And look, if they stay in contact, I know I'm in this kind of world I'm in, but I would love to come on, and Robert as well, because I mean, Robert and I always talk. We're still best friends. I mean, that guy right there. Oh, sounds good.
No, for sure.
Well, it sounds like a freaking submarine.
Yeah, that's
I'm in my truck.
Robert's using his sonar to get things figured out. So, well, man, guys,
he's scoping out what.
Listen, hey, I appreciate you guys coming on and giving us a little bit of insight to the early VW scene, some of the true background of what goes on, and sometimes the history that's just not so pretty sometimes, you know what I mean? But it's history nonetheless. And if we don't recognize our history, sometimes we're doomed to repeat it again. So, man, I appreciate.
You're absolutely right.
Yeah, appreciate you guys from coming on, William and Robert, and we'll definitely do something again for sure. Well, I'm going to say that was a pretty interesting story, and there's a lot of layers to that, and it leaves a lot more questions out there. But nonetheless, the whole point of having this podcast was just to, those guys wanted to just have some time to talk about the early scene that they were involved in and what it was like back in those days. So I hope you guys enjoyed it. If you like it, make sure you share the podcast with a friend, post it up on your favorite sites. Share the podcast, and it helps the podcast grow. Don't forget to subscribe so you get notified every time there's a new podcast up. And until next week, guys, later.
You probably don't know that there's a new Volkswagen out that doesn't look like a Volkswagen.